Do you live in a state where they legalized online sports betting for a whole month before the state court stopped it? Florida. Do you live in a state where sports betting has always been illegal? Ohio. We'll say hello to the brand new Best Bet 55 ratings app, where you can make money from your betting picks without gambling any money. Here's how: you make your selections on the spread. For example, the Warriors are 5.5 point underdogs against the Timberwolves tonight, and I think they'll cover that. So I'll select the Warriors plus 5.5. Or you can make your selection on the over under. The Rockets Kings total tonight is 239. I don't believe those teams will combine for that many points, so in the app, I will select under 239. Everybody who signs up on the app, follows me at Dominic Mills 0, and sends me your Twitter link will be upgraded to pro status. If you make good picks, you will earn analyst or specialist distinction. Analysts and specialists get paid when other users pay to see their picks. The Dominic Mills BB55 March to Madness contest starts February 1st. Users will be picking college basketball games on the app, with the prize for the top 3 pickers. There's going to be merch and the opportunity to come on the podcast to discuss their favorite conspiracy theories or give their hot sports takes. Users must be following me on the app at Dominic Mills 0 to be eligible. For now, the app is only available to iPhone users, but I will be sure to announce it being available on more platforms. I'm going to include the link on the app in the show notes. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dominic Mills podcast. Sports talk and more for those who want to know it all. When I decided to start this podcast, I set out to meet extraordinary individuals and see what drives them to be extraordinary. With a truly ridiculous resume, my guest today has lived a life straight out of a movie. Terry Tucker is a former Division I basketball player at the Citadel, SWAT team hostage negotiator, narcotics investigator, high school girls basketball coach, author, and motivational speaker. He's had to reinvent himself many times over the course of his life. For the last 10 years, he has been battling an extremely rare form of cancer, which has caused him to lose his foot and his leg. But that hasn't stopped him from getting his message out. His novel, Sustained Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life, was published in 2020. Our interview next, but first, let's blast that intro.
Cuts it back. Ohio State wins. Barry looks, fires, touchdown Buckeye. Oh my goodness! Barry right here. How do you do? Cousins, Ohio State, look out! Oh, you don't like that. You don't like NBA basketball.
Okay, I'm joined by Terry Tucker. Thank you for coming on, Terry.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dominic. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Okay. Let's get right into it. I gave you a little small introduction in the pre-show, but I know the listeners at home would appreciate it way more if you gave your own little intro. Who is Terry Tucker in your own words?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was born and raised in Chicago. I am the oldest of 3 boys. You cannot tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I played college basketball at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. I have a brother that's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame's baseball team, and then I have another brother who's 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So I kind of joked that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on. But, our 5'8" mother ruled the roost. It didn't matter how big, tall, strong we were. Whatever mom said, that's the way it went. So after I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. This was, and I'm really going to date myself now, this was long before the internet was available. And I was all set to make my mark on the world with my newly obtained business administration degree. And I look back now and realize kind of what a knucklehead I was to think I knew anything about business just because I had a degree. Fortunately, I was able to find that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain. Unfortunately, I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. In terms of my professional career, as I mentioned, started out in marketing at Wendy's, became a hospital administrator, then did a major pivot in my life and became a police officer and did undercover narcotic work. I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator, started my own school security consulting business. Um, 2019 became a motivational speaker. 2020 had my first book published. But for the last 10 years or so, I've been battling this very rare form of cancer. And then to round it out, my wife and I have been married for 28 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Yeah, that's really cool. We got to talk about that a little bit beforehand. You mentioned you enrolled at the Citadel and your daughter's now in the Space Force. How does it feel to know that you've got multiple generations in the military and also branching out into a completely new sector that is really unheard of? I don't think we really know very much at all about the Space Force. They keep a lot of it like real close to the vest.
Yeah, neither do I. I mean, it's kind of one of those, yeah, I could tell you what I do, Dad, but I'd have to kill you kind of thing, you
Hmm.
know? So it's amazing. We couldn't be prouder of her. She was a person who, battled a lot of learning disabilities early on in her life. And, when she had this opportunity, fortunately or unfortunately, she got my height. And so she was recruited to play basketball at the Air Force Academy. But, it was really about the education that she got. And, I will never forget till the day I die, her walking across the stage, on that day in May, getting her diploma and shaking hands with the President of the United States. It was like, you know what? Doesn't get much better than this. So incredibly proud of her.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing, especially being able to meet a president like that. There's
Yeah,
not very many people in the world will ever get to say something like that. Uh,
exactly.
so what was it like growing up in Chicago in general? I know that you mentioned having like the big family, everybody playing basketball. What were some of the battles like growing up? Like every day playing sports, various ones. I know some played basketball, some played baseball. What was the most competitive between you guys?
Well, when we were very young, we lived in Columbus, Ohio. So I was born and raised. I was born in Chicago. We moved to Columbus. Ended up moving back to Chicago for high school and stuff like that. And my dad built a basketball court. It was, and I'm going to say it was a half court, but it wasn't that big. It was maybe 14 feet by 13 feet in the backyard. And I remember helping him as a little kid and stuff like that. And we would spend hours out there. And I'm the oldest, and the middle brother, he and I are 13 months apart. So we're pretty close in age. And then our youngest brother is 6 years younger than I am. So, I mean, we had a lot of, so it was the three boys and dad, or, dad and the little one against the two boys, so there were a
Hmm.
lot of pickup games, a lot of, I guess, trash talking for back then and things like that. It was just great. And we supported each other. We went to each other's games. And I think one of the most important things that my parents taught me was, the value of family. And, I watched my mom and dad do what I call the sort of divide and conquer parenting, where, well, Terry's got a game over here, mom would go to that. And, Larry's got a practice over here, dad would go to that. So they were constantly running, and it was all about us. They really put time and attention into that. And when I graduated from college, my dad was sick. He was dying of cancer. And I remember one night, my youngest brother was in high school and he had a high school basketball game. And I hadn't exercised. I hadn't worked out in a couple of days. And so I told my dad, I'm like, I'm not going to go to the game. I'm just going to go work out after work. My dad was like, no, you're not. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm an adult. I have my own job. What do you mean I'm not going? It's like, no, your brother needs you. He needs your support. And my dad was right. And I ended up going to the game. But that's what our family was about, caring for each other, nurturing each other, loving each other, supporting each other. And so it was just a blast growing up with my brothers. We still, even when we get together now as adults, we just laugh about the stories. I mean, literally in our family, if you're at the dinner table and you say pass a roll may come flying across the table at you. I mean, pass a roll literally means here's a roll. So you better have
Hmm.
good hands on that one.
No, that's really funny, and a lot of times something really similar for me at least is a lot of those memories early on growing up. I had a similar occasion. Like my dad built a basketball court just under half court, and it'd be really similar. It'd be my older brother and myself against my dad and my second oldest brother, and those are some really similar pickup games like that. And that really grows into your family first mindset that you have today. But first, I kind of want to talk to you about your time at the Citadel and playing basketball. Was that always the place that you wanted to go, or were there other options for you?
There were a lot of other options. I was very fortunate, even though I had three knee surgeries in high school. I mean, playing high school basketball in Chicago, I don't know if you know who Isaiah Thomas
Hmm.
is. I played against him in high school. We were in the same conference. We
That's
sat together at the all
crazy.
conference banquet. So that was amazing. I mean, I just played against a lot of great competition, a lot of guys that went on to play Division One basketball, and some of them would go on further. So I had this tremendous opportunity. I had Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski, when he was the coach at West Point, come to my house, sit on my couch, say, come play for me at West Point. And I said no. So I'm sure you're probably going to want to terminate the interview right now because I'm an idiot for doing, something like that.
Nah, it
But
all it all worked out the way it's supposed to. I don't know if
it
I'd be able
does.
to do that, but
Well, he wasn't Coach K then. He was
yeah.
still just starting out, and I'll never forget this. The Isaiah Thomas played for a school called St. Joe's, and St. Joe's was the farthest point from our school, and this was long before cell phones were available or anything like that. And so it was a long drive. We played the game. We got back late, and so I was sleeping in Saturday morning, and my mom comes in. She's like, "Get up! There's a phone call for you." I'm like, "Mom, just take a message. I'm tired. I just want to sleep. I'm a teenager. I want to sleep." And so she goes away, and then my dad comes in. And I told you my dad was 6'5". He was 250 pounds. He's a big guy. He's like, "Get up," and it was like, "Oh, okay, Dad. Why? Why do I have
Mhm,
to get up?" Well, Joe B. Hall was on the phone. Joe B. Hall was the coach of Kentucky, who had just
mhm.
won the national championship. So, I don't know how that conversation went. I don't remember much of it. I was probably half asleep, but I had a lot of great opportunities, but the Citadel was I played for Les Robinson, and very few people know this. Les Robinson's the only person who coached three Division One basketball programs: the Citadel, East Tennessee State, and North Carolina State, and was also the athletic director at the Citadel, East Tennessee State, and North Carolina State. And actually, Coach Robinson took over for Jim Valvano when Valvano kind of got in a little trouble at NC State. So, it's the Citadel, kind of a small school, but it was still Division One basketball. And my senior year, we played in what was called the North-South doubleheader, which was played in the Charlotte Coliseum. Took two teams from North Carolina, which just happened to be North Carolina and North Carolina State, and two teams from South Carolina, which happened to be the Citadel and Furman. And we played a round robin because we were both, in the same conferences. So Friday night, I played against North Carolina and Michael Jordan. That was the year that North Carolina won the national championship. That was 1982. So I got to play against Jordan, Worthy, Perkins, all those guys. And then Saturday night, got to play against Valvano and all his guys, who the following year, 1983, they won the national championship. So in the course of one weekend, got to play, two national championship teams and some great basketball.
That's insane. So you got to play against Isaiah Thomas, Michael Jordan, so many of those other guys in such a short period of time. That's do you ever think about like those times then? Were you able to like just see those guys and know that they were gonna be special players at that point in time?
I mean, it was Jordan's freshman year. No. I mean, some of them, yes. I mean, Worthy was older, and we were in the South. We were in South Carolina. That's where Clemson was. Horace Grant, who played on that Bulls team with Jordan and Pippen,
Hmm.
got to play against him. But I'll give you a funny story. Sort of fast forward, 18, 19 years. My youngest brother, who pitched at Notre Dame, is a basketball coach at Loyola Academy in Chicago, and he's coaching Michael Jordan's two sons. And so one day he's at practice, and he's trying to teach the players a play, and he looks up and nobody's paying attention to him. So he kind of looks over where they're looking, and it's over by the door. And Jordan had come into the gym as a dad, as a parent, just to pick up his kids after practice. And so my brother looks at him and says, "Hey, Michael, you're a little bit of a distraction. Would you mind stepping out in the hall until practice is over. And Jordan and his wife were incredibly just great parents. They didn't, try to coach or anything like that. He was like, sorry, coach, no problem. I'll be out in the hall until practice is over. And my brother thought later, I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever kicked Michael Jordan out of practice, so.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have done that either. Oh my goodness. So who would you say is your favorite player playing today?
That's a great question. I live in Colorado, so I'm going to have to say Jokovic, because he was the MVP last year and stuff
I
like that.
love
And
Jokic.
yeah, he's just a great. I mean, he's just a great teammate too. I mean, it's not all about him; it's about setting people up and stuff like that. So yeah, it's fun to watch the Nuggets play.
Yeah, they really are fun to watch. I can't wait to see them when they're healthy again. But
yeah, I know.
So one experience that we have in common is coaching high school girls basketball. What was your favorite part of coaching? And describe a little bit about the biggest difference between boys basketball and girls basketball, especially at that level, because that's something that not a lot of people think of unless they are a fan of both.
Yeah, I like girls basketball because I think it's more of a pure game. The fundamentals still matter. I mean, everybody isn't out there trying to, get the latest dunk and all that kind of stuff. I mean, most of them can't. Few of them can. But I girls play basketball. Girls play sports in general for the camaraderie, for the fellowship, for being together. Where that's not necessarily true of boys. And it was certainly an eye-opening experience for me. I remember one time I was coaching, we were right in the middle of a game, and I turned to the bench and I pointed to one of the players, and I'm like, go in for so-and-so, and she nods her head, and I turn back around watching the game, and then I look over at the scores table, and there's nobody there. I'm like, okay, so I turn around, I'm like, get in the game. And then she's shaking me off like a big league pitcher, saying, no, I don't like that sign. I'm like, what? The game's going on. What do you mean you're shaking me off? You don't want to go in the game? And so finally I brought her over to me and I was like, what's the problem? She's like, I don't want to go in the game. I'm like, well, there are no uniform wearers on this team. You practice hard every day. I need you in the game. And she's like, I don't want to go in the game. I'm like, why not? Because if I make a mistake, my friends are going to laugh at me. I'm like, what about your responsibility to the other players, the other girls on the team? Don't you have a responsibility to them too, not worrying about your friends in the stands? Well, yeah. And then the tears start coming down, the cheeks. And I thought, oh my God, are we really going to have a counseling session right in the middle of a basketball game? And I did. But so I got her to go in the game, but I was flabbergasted. I'm like, I just can't believe, I've never had that. And I've coached boys before, but I've never had, anybody tell me they didn't want to go in the game. I mean, people couldn't wait to get in the game. It's like, play me, coach, come on. But with girls, it was just something different that I really had to teach them about teamwork and things like that. A lot of them just didn't get it. So what was your experience like?
So I actually coached my sister's team like right out of high school. So she was, she's graduated now, so I can say this. So she was objectively like the best player on the team. And I don't know. She didn't want to listen to a word I said. Like it was the sort of thing like I would have to say something to somebody else so she would be able to get the message. But it really was so different. I would coach AAU in the summer and for the boys, and there would be times I would turn around, I'd see somebody trying to sneak their way to the scores table to get checked in, and the girls' game would be the similar case. Like, oh, I'm scared. I'm not ready to go into the game. So what would you say, how did you get started as in your police service?
So my grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. So he was in Chicago during Prohibition when alcohol was outlawed in the United States, during the Great Depression in the 20s, late 20s, early 30s. And when the gangs, Al Capone and those guys were shooting up the town. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad always remembered the stories that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. And my grandfather was shot in 1935. So, trauma medicine back then was not nearly what it is today. And so when I expressed an interest in going into law enforcement, my dad was like, absolutely not. You're going to go to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out, get this great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. Well, that was what my dad wanted me to do. That's what, the life my dad wanted me to live. So I had a choice. When I graduated from college, my dad, as I mentioned, my dad was sick. So I could either say, you know what, Dad, the heck with you. I'm going to go off and blaze my own trail and follow my heart. Or out of love and respect for you, I will go into business and do what you want me to do. And that's what I did. And I had two great jobs working at the corporate headquarters of Wendy's and working for a large hospital in Columbus. Learned a lot, but it wasn't my passion. It just wasn't in my heart. And so I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited until my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. So I was a 37-year-old rookie police officer, which, I took a whole lot more Tylenol in the police academy because I wasn't nearly as young as the rest of these young people. But it was an amazing experience, one that I wish I was still doing. But you know what? Life has a way of kind of throwing you a curve from time to time. And you know what? I am where I am now, and I'm very happy about the work I did in law enforcement.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you were 6'8". So what is it like being a 6'8" undercover cop?
I get that a lot. And it's funny because what motivates that industry, and drugs, illicit drugs is an industry, but by no means a small industry. It's huge. And I guess what I said, what motivates people is greed. And so it doesn't matter how tall you are, whatever, as long as you have money, you can buy drugs. And I'll never forget. One time I was a policeman in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I had one of the day shift people say, "Hey, look, I got an informant. These young people from Dayton, Ohio, are going to come to Cincinnati. They want to party." So they want to sell you some mushrooms, get the money to go party in Cincinnati. Will you buy from them? I'm like, yeah, sure. So I posed as a professor of metallurgy from the University of Cincinnati that was going to buy these drugs from these kids in this park. I didn't know anything about metal other than, you put it out in the rain and it rusts. That was my extent.
I was going to ask you what metallurgy is.
Yeah, it's the study of metal, and so that much I knew. And so I meet these kids in the park, and, they get in the car and they give me the mushrooms. I look at them, I give them the money. They get out, they get in their car, and then, like 8 cars surround them, marked cars, unmarked cars. And they ended up partying in the Hamilton County Justice Center that night instead of, in downtown Cincinnati. But it was a lot of fun. It was very dangerous, got shot at a couple times, had people, point guns at my colleagues and stuff like that. So it's a very dangerous job, but it's one that, I worked with a good group of people. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, of course. So tell me about the first time you said that this was like, your passion, what you really wanted to do. Tell me about the first time you came home from work and you just sat down and you're like, damn, this is a great day. Like it was all worth it. Like all the struggle, waiting that long, all the pain medication you take waiting that long, as you're going through the academy as you're older, all the struggles. What was the first time you sat down? You're like, damn, it's worth it.
Well, I guess so. I was a full-time police officer in Cincinnati, but when my wife and I got married, we moved to California. We lived in Santa Barbara, and I saw a circular one day. It came in the mail, and I was just leafing through it for Santa Barbara City College. And there was a class in there that if you took the class and you completed it, that you could apply to be a reserve police officer with any agency within the state of California. And so, my wife and I, we'd gotten married, and she'd married me when I was a, 8 to 5 suit and tie kind of guy. And so one night at dinner, I'm like, honey, what do you think? I'd like to take this class and maybe see what happens. Well, it ended up being taught by one of the sergeants in Santa Barbara. And so she was like, yeah, go ahead. If you want to, go ahead and do it. So I took the class, I passed it, and I applied to be a reserve officer with Santa Barbara. And I got on, and I would work my regular job all week. And then I would come home Friday night after work. I'd put on my uniform. I'd go to roll call, and I'd work all night. So I hadn't slept and stuff like that. And my wife used to say that you would come home with this big, you're exhausted, but this big grin on your face. It was just like, she said, and I knew that was what you were supposed to do. So it was I mean, I couldn't wait. It's like, let's go. Can I do more of this? I mean,
Hmm.
it was just a lot of fun. And I think a lot of it is you have to work with good people. I mean, and if you work with good people that are safe and do the job the right way, it's a blast. I mean, if you work with people that shouldn't be in the job, and I worked with some of those people in Cincinnati that, it's like that person shouldn't be a cop. Eventually they'll get weeded out. It's like, no, you need to go. This isn't for you. And I used to talk to the academy when I was on SWAT. We would train once a month down at the academy, and sometimes I talk to the new recruits. And I always told them, if you're here, to kick ass and take names, you're in the wrong job. That they're going to spend 6 months teaching you all these neat little tools on your belt, but the two biggest tools you bring to that job are your brain and your mouth. And you can turn a yes person into a no person based on what you say, and conversely, in a lot of cases, you can turn a no person into a yes person based on what you say. So it was just a lot of fun.
Okay. And you spoke a little bit earlier about the high level risk factor, obviously, that comes with the job. How would you say that the experiences there shaped your life after you left the police force?
I think one thing, especially working in the drug unit, you really want to fly under the radar, and I work nights, and so I'm not real comfortable sharing a lot of things, and so I like keeping things close to the vest. I didn't tell a lot of people. I mean, all my neighbors knew, and they always knew that if you see a strange car or something like that, call the police and things like that, because I work nights, so I slept during the day. And I slept in the basement of our house because it was cold and it was dark. And
Hmm.
it's hard enough to sleep when you have to go to court during the day. So, I mean, people knew, but I didn't usually tell people what I did. I would say I worked for the city, or, something like that, or I worked for the safety department. I never really liked that. So it caused me to sort of, be a little, I don't want to call it standoffish, but, my wife sort of jokes when we used to go to parties and things like that. I would, I would go around, I could tell you a lot about most people at that party because of what I did on the SWAT team, but nobody knew anything about me because we're narcissistic. We like talking about ourselves. So I would just ask you a question about hey, what do you do for a living, or what do you like to do, when you're not working and stuff like that. And then I would just keep asking you questions, and you just keep volunteering information, and then I move on to the next person. And it drove my wife crazy. I'd get in the car, we're driving home. Well, let me tell you about John. John does
Hmm.
this, and it's like, and John doesn't know anything about me because we like to talk about ourselves. So rarely would I ever get, well, what do you do, or that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So
That's really cool. I would have never even thought of it like that. So how did you get involved, like with the SWAT? So I know you said that they took that class. Is that how you got started with that?
I took the class to become a reserve officer in Santa Barbara. The
Hmm.
way law enforcement works is it's pretty much regulated by state. So if you were a cop in California and you want to go to become a cop in Ohio, you're going to have to start all over again. And so I did. I went through the police academy. I remember I sat for the test. The Cincinnati Police Department was looking for 100 applicants, 50 in each of their academy classes, and they had like 3,500 people take the test. So they take the test. You have to score certain, and then there's a physical fitness test. You have to score well on that. Then there's a psychological test. You have to meet with a psychologist and take all kinds of different written tests and things like that. There are interviews. They interview they go back and interview your grade school teacher and things like that. So it's hard. It's hard to get in, but once you're in, it's just a lot of fun. So I've always wanted to be part of the best, and SWAT gets the best training. They have usually the best people within the department. So when they had an opening for a negotiator, I put in for it, but then had to go back and do all kinds of physical fitness to get into SWAT, had to go back through the psychology test, had to go through the interviews, but finally got on, and had a really good time with that too. Worked with some great people, and got some great training as well. Worked with the FBI's hostage negotiation team and stuff. So it was a lot of fun.
What is like the training for that specifically that's different than just like base level? I guess, in terms of like, I don't know, how you're communicating with people, especially if you're doing the actual negotiating.
So if you think about it in law enforcement, 99.9% of what you do as a police officer regarding a citizen, another person, is face to face. Whether you stop them to give them a ticket for speeding, or you respond on a radio run to a domestic or whatever it is, it's face to face with people. The difference in negotiating is it was never face to face. It could be, there's a locked door between you. It could be you're blocks away and talking to somebody on a phone. So a lot of times you didn't have a lot of information. So you had to figure things out based on what people were saying, what they weren't saying, and how they were saying it. And there were many times where you'd spend a couple hours, over here talking about something with the person, but the real issue was over here, and you hadn't even gotten to that yet. And so, you had to be real good. And obviously, you've probably figured out by now, sometimes you can't shut me up. But one of the important things about being a negotiator is the importance of silence. And what we were trying to do, and I kind of describe it like a teeter-totter or a seesaw at the park. When we're negotiating with somebody, their emotional end is way up in the air, and their rational side is down on the ground. And so you need to ask them open-ended questions to burn off that emotional energy. You just want them to talk, and so hopefully you get that teeter-totter to equilibrium. And if you're really good at it, you get to where the rational side is up in the air and the emotional side is down on the ground. And we all know we make better decisions when we're thinking with our rational brain as opposed to our emotional brain. So we would, ask a question, the person would talk for a while, and then they stop talking. And then a lot of times we would just sit there, and there would be this silence. And people don't like silence. They want to fill it. So they'd start talking again. And that's what you wanted them to do and get to that point. And about 90% of the time, we were successful at either getting the barricaded person out or getting the hostage out with the barricaded person. But about 10% of the time, we weren't. 10% of the time, the person ended up taking their own life. And while that was tragic, the way I looked at it was, and I don't mean to sound callous, is that, you're asking me to show up at a scene. And obviously, if you're talking to me as a hostage negotiator and your house is surrounded by guys with, big rifles, you're probably having the worst day of your life. So the issue here was, it's not realistic to ask me to solve a problem that may have been festering for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years that culminated on this day or this night, in 4 hours or 5 hours or 6 hours. So I knew I did the best I could. I knew I had great training and I worked with great people. So if you made the choice to kill yourself, that was on you. I did everything I could to try to get you out, to try to, make sure that you got out safely. And the overarching theme of being a negotiator was always trust. We never lied to people. I mean, people would say, hey, I'll come out, but I don't want to go to jail. And you would have to say, well, when you come out, you are going to go to jail, but then you try to deflect the conversation to something more positive. So we never lied to people. And that was really because we were probably going to negotiate with that same person a year from now or 2 years from now. And if they remembered you lied to them, then you were going to have to bring another negotiator in to do it because you'd lost all credibility because they didn't trust you.
How would you have to negotiate with them again in a year or so? Would that be in? I'm not sure. I don't know what I'm trying to ask here, but how would there be another negotiation? I guess.
So I mean, maybe there, and so we worked as a team. So there was one person negotiating. And then sitting right next to that person is another negotiator that's writing you notes. So, here, blah, blah, whatever. And then there are 3 or 4 more negotiators that are kind of working the crowd, like, why are we here? What brought us to this point and stuff like that. So you may be negotiating and you get a note that says, don't ask him about his mother because, he had a big fight with his mom. And that's what, ticked all this off. And now we're here for hours. So it's like, okay, that's good. Well, unless his mom dies, his mom's still around. So yes, he's going to go to jail and hopefully he's going to get mental health treatment. But he very well may 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, have another blow up with his mother where, he decides I'm going to get a gun and I'm going to barricade myself and I'm going to start shooting at people. So it was not uncommon for, like I said, I'm not going to solve your problem, that's been festering for years. I mean, you're 40 years old, your mother's, 60 years old. Well, guess what? Mom could live another 20 years and you've been fighting since you were little kids. Well, we may be back here doing the exact same thing a year from now. And in several cases, we were.
I would have never thought that you had to deal with the same person more than once with that. That's got to be insane. So, oh my, what is I guess what was one memorable story without saying too much about it? Obviously, what is one memorable story from your time as a negotiator?
I'll give you two quick ones. One was kind of a funny one. We were not a full-time SWAT team. We carried, and again, I'm going to date myself, pagers. And when the pager went off, you went to the scene. So I happened to be working this particular night in uniform, so I was able to get to the scene fairly quickly. And I get there, and I'm talking to the uniformed officers. And I'm like, "What's the deal?" It's like, this guy's drunk. He's barricaded himself inside the house with his wife and a gun, and he won't come out. I'm like, okay, let me. And they had him on the phone, so I'm talking to him, and after about 10 minutes, and usually, I talked about that, emotional side and the rational side. Usually you don't talk to anybody about coming out until that rational side is come into play. But this had been about 15 minutes, and the guy was just drunk. So I said to him, I'm like, what would it take for you to let your wife come out and then you come out? He's like, give me a beer. I'm like, if I gave you a beer, I have your word you would come out. He said, do I have your word you'd let me drink it when I came out? I said, you have my word. He said, then you have my word that I'll let my wife go and come out. So I gave one of the officers $5. I said, get down to the store and get a beer. And the tactical guys put the beer on the front porch. And I called them back and I'm like, your beer's on the front porch, but you don't get it till your wife comes out. And then you put the gun down and you come out. All of a sudden the door flies open. Here comes the wife. Here he comes with his hands up. We handcuff him, let him drink the beer, and off to jail he goes. So that was one goofy one. A more serious one was a man who wanted to take his own life. He had tried to slit his wrists and that didn't work. For some reason, he decided to turn the gas on his stove on and put his head in the oven. That didn't work. And then he called a relative, and the relative ended up calling the police, and now he had a gun and he was barricaded. And I was talking to him, and I talked to him for about 2 hours, and it was like 4:00 in the morning now. And this whole incident with him had started, like at 10 o'clock the previous night. And I think I just warmed down. I think he was just tired. And he said, I'd like to come out. And I'm like, well, why don't you do that? I said, when you come out, I'll come down to the scene and we'll talk face to face. And he's like, yeah, I'd really like that. I said, but don't hang up the phone. Just put the gun down. Don't hang up the phone. Well, he hung up the phone, which isn't uncommon because we're kind of conditioned that when a call is over, we hang up the phone. And then about 30 seconds later, one of the tactical officers comes on the radio and was like, we heard a gunshot. I thought, are you kidding me? You actually shot yourself. He did. Shot himself in the head. The bullet, he shot at himself at an angle where the bullet went underneath the scalp, went around his head, and came out the other side. Never penetrated his skull, never got to his brain. So 3 times he tried to kill himself. That said to me that, you know what, young man, God's not done with you yet.
Yeah, it's not your day. Wow. Okay, so moving on to, I guess, a more somber subject. How has your battle with cancer strengthened your faith and relationships with your family?
Yeah, one of the things that really has gotten me through this 10-year battle with cancer, which has caused me to have my foot amputated in 2020, my leg amputated, was what I call my 3 Fs: faith, family, and friends. And I've always had a very strong faith in God. I don't put that on anybody else. I mean, it works for me. I've had people ask me, you got cancer, who do you blame? We're great as a society of wanting to blame people for not getting what we want. We don't take responsibility for our own success and happiness. And, people are like, do you blame God? And I sort of joke. I'm like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, looked at his to-do list and said, Terry Tucker, cancer today. I don't think that happened at all. But I really feel God has given me the strength to get through some really difficult times in my life. And then my family, it's just my wife and daughter. And when I had my leg amputated, my oncologist wanted to put me on chemotherapy. And I talked to him and I was like, is it going to save my life? And he was like, probably not, but it might buy you some more time. And I'm like, well, I'm 8 years into this fight. I don't think I want to go through that if the outcome is going to be the same, but I'll go home and talk to my family. So I go home and I start talking to my wife and daughter. And my daughter's immediately, hey, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's three of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that. So we sit around the kitchen table and we talk about how we each feel about me taking chemotherapy. And after we're done, my daughter's like, oh, okay, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. And I'm like, what? Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to do? And I remembered back when I was in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you'll fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy because in all honesty, I love my family more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. It has gotten me to the point where I am right now on a clinical trial drug and stuff like that. I wouldn't probably be still around if I hadn't taken it. So, I mean, God works in mysterious ways, but it's just kind of funny. You need that support system, and cancer tends to isolate you from, your family and friends anyway. So it's real important to have close people that, you can rely on.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about that day that you found out initially. I know that was, I've heard you tell the story before. It's a pretty good story, actually. How you found out from your friend.
Yeah. So, I'm a girls' high school basketball coach, and I have a callus break open on the bottom of my foot right below my third toe. Initially, don't think a whole lot about it. But, after a couple of weeks of it not healing, I went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine, and, took an x-ray, and he said, Jerry, I think you have a cyst in there. And he cut the cyst out and he showed it to me. It was just a gelatin sac with some white fat on it, but he sent it off to pathology. And then 2 weeks later, I get a call from him. And as I said, he's a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having expressing what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming, until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years, and I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have a very rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And I recommend you go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston and be treated for that. It's probably the best cancer hospital, certainly in the US, probably in the world. And so I did. And, when I found that out, I went through all the stages that I think we associate with grief. I was like, in denial. No, it can't be. I've done everything right in my life. I exercise, never smoked, never, and then I got mad. It's like, no, I can't have this. And, then I was bargaining with God and stuff like that. And eventually I just got to the point where it was like, well, you know what? These are the cards that I've been dealt. It's kind of the old embrace the suck thing. This sucks. This is terrible. But you know what? I've been dealt these cards and I have to play them to the best of my ability. And so that's what I've been doing since 2012. And, that's really when I healed from my surgeries at MD Anderson, my doctor put me on a drug called interferon to help keep the disease from coming back. And interferon gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And I still look back. I remember when she suggested that, I looked at her, I said, that's just cruel. You shouldn't put a human being through that. And she's like, do the best you can. She was tough as nails. And so I did. And then 2017, I had to stop the interferon because it became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a fever of 108 degrees, which usually isn't compatible with being alive. But I was at a level 1 trauma center and they were able to save me in the ER before sending me to the intensive care unit. And as soon as the interferon was stopped, the cancer came back almost in the exact same place. And that was 2017. 2018, I had my left foot amputated because of the cancer. 2019, it worked its way up my shin, 2 more surgeries. And then 2020, an undiagnosed tumor in my ankle area grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And my only recourse right in the middle of the pandemic was to have my leg amputated above the knee. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs. As I mentioned, I'm being treated for those right now. And on that uplifting story,
Yeah, the word it's crazy. I was talking to my parents about this when we spoke initially. So many awful things have happened, but you're so upbeat about it. It makes it so hard to, I don't know, the words don't hit the way that when you say it, the words don't hit the same way for me. I'm sure that they have to for you. What would you attribute that positive attitude to?
I think one of the things that I learned playing team sports, and I started playing basketball when I was 9 and played all the way up till I graduated from college when I was 21. And one of the things I think you learn in team sports is the importance of being part of something bigger than yourself. And on a team that if you don't do your job, not only letting yourself down, but you're letting your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, etc. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. And as I mentioned, I'm on this clinical trial drug now that more than likely is not going to save my life. It has had some success on the tumors in my lungs. It shrunk them by about 30%, but they're still there. And I still am treated for them every week. But the way I look at it is, maybe the information that the doctors are gleaning from me, all the blood tests, all the scans, will help them synthesize this drug and make this drug even more effective so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, this drug can be used to save someone else's life. And to me, that's part of being, part of something that's bigger than yourself. I won't be here, I won't, know who those people were, but that legacy that I'm hopefully going to try to leave them is something that makes my life have more meaning, have more value, at least in my eyes. It may not in other people, but that's just something that I learned early on. And we all play this game of life, and a lot of times, especially young people, get the bad rap that it's all about me. Well, unfortunately, it's not. I mean, you're unique, but you're not really special, and we may not be able to do things as an individual, but if we come together, we can do just about anything we set our minds to. So I guess that's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, I like your answer. And you speaking about legacy actually brings me to my next question. So, something I've heard you say a couple times is what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of others. Can you define what that means to you specifically?
Yeah, when I was going to have my leg amputated and I found out of these tumors in my lungs, I went with my wife to the mortuary, to the cemetery, to the church, and I planned my funeral. And I go on these podcasts and I talk about motivation and continuing to move forward and stuff like that. And when people found out I did that, I got some brushback from people. People are like, "Oh, don't you think that's kind of defeatist?" And I kind of looked at them like, well, last time I checked, we're all going to die. I don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now. So, I was like, everybody dies, but not everybody really lives. And I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I just love. And this is what it was. It's like, when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. And I think the important words in that saying are live your life. Find the reason that you were put on the face of this earth and live that reason. We are not all born with the same gifts and talents, but we all have the ability to become the best person that we're capable of becoming. And if you do that, if you live the purpose for which you were born, death is not nearly as scary when it comes to be your time. And it's going to be, all of us are going to die. Nobody, as far as I know, except for one person, has gotten out of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. We talked about Jimmy Valvano earlier, Coach Valvano. Talk to me about what that famous speech he had means to you.
Yeah, so for those of your audience who don't know, Coach Valvano was the coach of North Carolina State in I think it was 1993. He was given the Arthur Ashe Award for courage at the ESPYs. He was dying of cancer, and he talked about what that meant for him. And I didn't understand what he said. I didn't understand what he was trying to get across because I didn't have cancer in 1993. And, fast forward to my cancer journey, I had a nurse ask me, what's it been like to have your foot amputated and have your leg amputated and to go through all this garbage that you're going through? And I told her it hasn't been easy. I'm still learning how to walk with a prosthetic and things like that. But I guess I echoed to her kind of the same thing that Coach Valvano said, that, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who we really are. We get all caught up in our bodies, how do we look and all that kind of stuff. But this is just a house or a vessel or whatever you want to call it for the who we really are as people. And we all have a soul, we all have a mind, we all have a heart, and that's what connects us. That's what brings us together. So so for me, it's, yeah, I could lose another leg, I could lose an arm, I could lose an eye, I could do whatever, but that doesn't define me. That's not who I am. Who I am is my heart, my soul, and my mind.
Well, that's really powerful. I think that anybody who listens to this can take that message and really move forward with that. So those messages really bring me to my next question. So what prompted you to write your book, Sustained Excellence: 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life?
Yeah, so sustainable excellence is really was born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that moved to Colorado, where my wife and I live, and we had dinner with her and her fiance. And I said to her one night, really excited that you're living close, and I can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a while, and it's like, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? And I said, I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Trying to find the reason you were put on the face of this earth. And then once you do that, live that reason. And then the second conversation was with a young man who reached out to me on social media and asked me what I thought were the most important things he should learn to not just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others. Not that those aren't important. They are incredibly important. And I don't want to minimize them in any way, but I was trying to see if I could, maybe go a little bit deeper with him. So I took some time and I wrote some notes, and eventually I had these 10 ideas, these 10 thoughts, these 10 principles. And then I sent them to him. And then I sort of stepped back and I was like, well, I've got a life story that fits underneath this principle. And I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally during the 3-month period that I was healing after I had my leg amputated and before I started the chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories underneath each of those principles. And they're real stories about real people and things like that. They're not just kind of made up or anything like that. And, when I finished the book, I was like, well, do I have anything here? Is this any good or something like that? And I ended up publishing it, or working with a publishing company to have it published. And one day I'm sitting here and I get a message from somebody on LinkedIn, and he's like, could I call you? I'm like, I have no idea who this guy is. So eventually we connect. This is an 87-year-old man who bought the book and read it and said to me, Terry, if I would have had those principles when I was younger, I would have had a much better life. So, it kind of made me feel like, well, yeah, maybe there is something to this. Maybe we're making a difference in people's lives who read it. So that's pretty much how it came to be.
Okay. So without giving too much of the book away, what is one principle that you'd like to share with the audience today that could benefit anyone who reads it?
Yeah, and it's fun for me. Obviously I've never birthed a child, but this is, writing a book and having it published is probably as close as I'll ever come to creating something that, that will live on. And so, I've got these 10 principles, and whenever people read the book, there's always one principle that kind of jumps out at them. It's the one that resonates most with them. And even though I wrote the book and I know all the 10 principles, the one that resonates with me, and each principle is a chapter, is this one. Most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And I know I've done that. I know I've done it a lot of times where, I kind of like, oh, I'd like to do that, but it kind of scares me. Or what if I, fail and people will laugh at me and things like that. And one of the things that I try to do myself every day, and I certainly recommend to other people, is to do just one thing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Some something small every day that makes you uncomfortable, that makes you nervous, that scares you, that could potentially be embarrassing. Because if you do that every day, and like this morning, I picked up the phone. I hate going to the dentist. I picked up the phone and made my 6-month appointment to go to the dentist. That was my, I didn't really want to do it, but okay, it's uncomfortable. I'll do that. Like I said, hey, maybe I'm going to get up an hour early tomorrow because I want to read some more in this book that I'm reading and things like that. So whatever you're doing, do just one thing every day, because if you do that, when the big things in our lives hit, and they hit for all of us, we lose somebody close to us, we lose our job, we're living out of our car, whatever that is, when those big things hit, you're going to be so much more resilient to handle those things because you've challenged yourself every single day. And it's not a hard thing to do, but it's a hard thing to start. And once you start it, I think it really kind of snowballs, and you're like, yeah, I'm uncomfortable about it. There are days that I don't want to put on my prosthetic. It's like, oh man, it's hard, and it's still hard to learn to walk. But you know what? I'm going to do that because it makes me uncomfortable, but I'll get better at it and things like that. So I guess that's the one principle that resonates with me, and maybe it'll resonate with some of your listeners as well.
Yeah, and you mentioning that specifically really hits home for me because I have the podcast. I've named it after myself, so obviously there's a small bit of ego in there, I guess. But every day I have an episode I'm getting ready to record, I get myself so amped up and so nervous. I'm like, oh my goodness, am I actually going to record this? Am I actually going to record this? And I have to stop myself and relax, center myself before every episode. Even before this, like an hour ago, I was cranking out some push-ups, trying to get myself to get all my extra energy out. So what is something that you're reading lately?
So I'm rereading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. It's kind of a Stoic philosophy. One of the books, I guess, that I would recommend that I read last year that I thought was amazing, that I could not put down, and I've taken 4 pages of notes while I was reading it, is a book called Legacy. And it's written by a man. You're shaking your head, so you've heard of it.
Yeah,
For
we
your
talked
listeners
about
that
it, and I read
haven't,
it.
it's written by a man by the name of James Kerr, and it's about the New Zealand national rugby team, who, by all intents and purposes, are probably the most successful sports franchise in any sport in any country of all times. And one of the things that I thought was amazing in that book, and I don't know anything about rugby at all, so I'm not going to try to insult them with my knowledge, but one of the things I thought was interesting is that when they're looking to bring a player onto their team, I would think they're going to bring somebody on who's technically competent in whatever position that they're going to bring them on for. But that's not the case with them. They hire for 2 things. Number one is character. What kind of person are you? I mean, how do you treat your wife? How do you treat your kids? How do you treat the dog? What character? What kind of person are you? And then 2, humility. We tend to think, I think, especially in job interviews, when we go into job interviews, I've got to have all the answers. They're going to hire me because I have all the answers. Well, I'm 61 years old. I don't have all the answers. I've been battling cancer for 10 years. I don't have all the answers. But I think the way they look at it is, you may not have the answer individually, but us collectively as a team will come together and come up with the answer. We'll figure it out. And so that kind of floored me, and it was like, wow, here's the greatest team of all times, and they hire for character and humility. So, I mean, think about that in your own life and how you're moving through life, and keep those in mind as maybe 2 qualities that you want to have, regardless of what you do for a living.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed that book after you recommended it to me, because so much of I'm not a rugby fan either. I don't really know anything about it, but so much of that book is just stuff about so many lessons for life, really. And then there are a lot of sports books you get really caught up. They get caught up in the nitty gritty, which I love about other sports books, because you read those books because you want to know what's going on, but they really do a great job of just painting like why, building a culture, why things work the way that they do. All right, so wrapping up, what is one conspiracy theory that you believe wholeheartedly in?
Boy, that's a good one. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when JFK was shot and killed. And that's John F. Kennedy for those of
Hmm.
your audience who don't know who JF
They
Kennedy
they
is.
better they have an episode on that coming up sometime soon.
Oh,
I'm
good.
still I'm
Okay,
still
good.
writing my script for that one, but it's coming
I
soon.
I don't know if I have an answer for your question. I mean, I don't really believe in Bigfoot. I guess I'm kind of leaning more towards the whole UFO thing.
Hmm.
Given everything that's come out lately through the military and you know Air Force planes, Navy planes, things like that that have actual gun camera footage of objects that can't do what anybody on Earth, as far as we know, knows how to do. So I guess the closest I would come to answering your question would be that I'm starting to believe maybe a little bit more that UFOs are real.
Okay. Do you think that the government like has a lot better knowledge on what they've seen than what they've shown us so far, or do
Yes.
you think? I do too. I just wanted to get that from you. Okay.
Yeah, I think the government. I mean, with my daughter being in the military and being in Space Force and
Mhm.
things like that, I think there are things that she knows that the vast majority of the general public will never know. I mean, even that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think there's probably a lot more that, and maybe it's good that we don't know. Maybe we don't want to be panicked and
Mhm.
worried and things like that. And hopefully there are people that are smart, that are that have character, that are keeping tabs on these kind of things. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, but I think it came out a couple weeks ago that NASA had hired, I think, 2 dozen. I don't know. I'm going to say the wrong word. I think it's theologians to study how people would react to knowing that aliens are real. And
I
I
didn't see that. That's
that's
interesting.
that's it's a weird sort of report to come out. I don't know, like how if they just kind of divulge that information, if one of them came out and said something. But either way, it's a weird thing for them to be doing for no reason really.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. All right, so before we go, is there anything else you want to plug? I know we mentioned your book. Is there anything else that's coming out or anything?
I don't have anything else that's coming out. I guess if you don't mind, I'll just leave you with another story.
Yeah,
And
please do. Please do.
so, always been a big fan of westerns growing up. Mom and Dad used to let me stay up and watch Bonanza and Wild Wild West and things like that. And 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You probably saw it. It was a huge blockbuster movie. It starred Val Kilmer as a man by the name of John Doc Holliday and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp were two living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not made up characters for the movie. And Doc was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much Doc Holliday was a gunslinger and a card shark. And Wyatt Earp had been a lawman his entire life. And so these two men from entirely divergent backgrounds somehow formed this very close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc Holliday is dying at a hospital in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from where I live. And the real Doc Holliday died in that sanitarium or that hospital, and he's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money, he has no job, he has no prospects for a job. But every day he comes to play cards with Doc, and the two men pass the time that way. And in this scene at the very end of the movie, they're talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, I was in love with my cousin when I was young, but she joined a convent over the affair, but she's all that I ever wanted. And he looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt kind of nonchalantly says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal, there's just life, and get on with living yours. Dominic, you and I probably know people that are sitting out there, maybe listening to us, maybe our friends that are sitting back. We're like, when this happens, I'll have a normal life. When that happens, I'll have a successful life. When this happens, I'll have a significant life. I guess what I would say is don't wait. Don't wait for life to come to you. Get out there, find the reason that you were put on the face of this earth, and live that reason. Because if you do, I'm going to promise you two things at the end of your life. Number one, you're going to be a whole lot happier. And number two, you're going to have a whole lot more peace in your heart.
Wow. That's really powerful. I really appreciate you sharing that.
You're welcome.
Okay. So that is all for me. I'm Dominic Mills. This is the wonderful Terry Tucker. Please make sure to check out his book. And that is all for us. You guys have a good one. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dominic Mills Podcast. If you like the show, please remember to rate it 5 stars and to leave a review. In light of that, I'm going to read this 5-star review on Apple Podcasts from Cap Deb. Dominic has a very nice and easy interview style. Although I'm not a big sports fan, his interviews with former sports figures have been enlightening. His interview with William Davis, actually William Adams, that's a little correction, from Microsoft was inspirational. From healthcare to history to tequity, Dominic's interviews open my mind and I always learn something new. Thank you so much, Cap Deb. I really can't articulate how much that means to me. All right, that's going to be all for me. Remember to stay safe and stay curious.